Good afternoon, everyone. Hello. In case we haven't had the chance to meet yet, my name is Grace O'Clairley. I am the new director here at the Tubac Presidio. Thank you all so much for joining us today, especially for braving this cold, wet, snowy weather that we've been having today. We appreciate you all making your way out here. We're so excited to have Pierre from Borderlandia here to do a great talk with us. In case you don't know about the great work that Alex and his wife do with Borderlandia, they are an organization committed to binational understanding of the borderland. So we're really excited to have him here to tell us all about Rocky Point. Thank you all.
Thanks so much, Grace, and so great to be here again at the Tubac Presidio. They're so gracious and always have us great collaboration and offer these different talks. Before I get started, I kind of like to start these in unconventional ways. I like to find out what you guys have heard about Rocky Point and the UNESCO Biosphere Reserve Pinacate. So feel free to shout it out or raise your hand. We're talking beyond the tequila and also the spring break for Rocky Point. So if you have anything else, go ahead. You know it's closed on Monday, Rocky Point? Ah, okay, yeah. It's been in the news lately, you know, the border closure there. It's wide open now. You guys can come.
No. The biosphere is closed on Monday.
Oh, on Monday. And that's when you wanted to go. Oh, okay. Gotcha. Yeah. You got to watch out for Mexican federal holidays. You know, they got the Day of the Revolution. They didn't have one revolution, but they had two revolutions. So there's 2 different days for that as well. But hopefully we can transport you there semi-vicariously today. So, yes. Oh, wow. Beautiful. That's a blessing for sure. Yeah, we're going to talk about some of the fauna today there too. Anything else? No? All right. Well, that's why you're here, right? To learn a little bit about it. So this, for me, is really one of the most beautiful images and one of the most beautiful features in this amazing UNESCO Biosphere Reserve. This is one of 10 craters that are there in the park, one of 10 volcanic craters. And they're known by the name Mar craters. It's because of the circumstance of how this volcano exploded, more or less. And basically what happened is magma under the surface of the earth, it mixed with underground water, aquifer. And what created with that steam was a huge explosion, even multiple explosions. And so that's why these volcanic eruptions are known, what's left of them are known as Mar craters. This one happens to be the youngest one. All of the volcanoes that are there, there's also about 400 different cinder cones. This one is probably about 12,000, 11,000 years old, the Cerro Colorado. And it's very unique because it mainly has this mud, you know, this earth colored compared to the other ones that we'll see later as well. Here we go with this is the seal, of course. It's a national park in Mexico. I don't know if you guys ever travel there, but if you pick up the new 200 currency note in Mexico, the brand new one features an image of the Pinacate on the back as well. You know, Mexican currency is a lot more colorful than ours, and it really highlights the creatures. Like they have a new one about the salamander, the axolote that's in Mexico City, and they also have females on their currency, unlike our country, right, as well too. But here, what's really distinctive, mentioning the borregos, here you have what's called barrendos in Spanish, which are the antelopes, the Sonoran pronghorn antelope that maybe some of you guys have been fortunate to see up here in the Sonoita grasslands. So it's the same species that is native to both sides of the border here, right? And to kind of give you a little bit of a navigational idea of where we're headed, first we'll talk about the geography, the climate, the history behind the place. We'll talk about actually the Pinacate Mountain, and we'll then kind of end up on Rocky Point, both today and its future as well. So there is the beautiful pronghorn sheep that take the seal there for the national park. The National Park Service in Mexico is called CONAMP. It's basically protects a federal land protection service from the Mexican government. The inscription actually took place in 2013. And the cool thing about the inscription is that it was inscribed with another very famous volcanic place in the world, Mount Etna in Sicily as well. So that inscription took place in 2013. And from the inscription, we can tell why this place is so unique, what sets us apart from all other places in the world, and why it's really a part of our human natural heritage here on the planet. And the real thing that really stands out about this place is its kind of contrast. You have two distinct parts to this biosphere reserve. You have the dormant volcanic Pinacate shield. And by shield, the volcanic shield, what it means is, imagine like an old Greek shield on a ground. You know how it's kind of, it has this kind of oval shape. That's how the volcanoes formed here in the Pinacate. A lot of us see Hawaii when the magma that's just exploding up into the air in real kind of chunky, almost biscuit-like kind of batter. The flows here were a lot more looser, and it spread it out into almost a desert pavement. And so that's what's meant by the terminology volcanic shield. And we're going to see some satellite images that really sets that clear for you guys as well. They're not only black, but there are also red flows as well. And this, for me, is why this landscape, I can only think of like Dali or some psychedelic, artist when you go there. Another thing that comes to mind as far as contrasts go, natural contrast, is I think of this place as the polar opposite of the Alpine zone. If you guys have been fortunate to been to Rocky Mountain National Park, this would be the polar opposite. So there you have such a high altitude, and here you have as low as you can go, right up at the level of the sea level of the Sea of Cortez as well. And you have some of the highest temperatures on the planet as well. So if you could think of it as the polar opposite of the alpine zones of the upper elevations, I think this helps really kind of clarify how special this place is. And so we talked about the volcanic shield, and what's such a contrast is some of the biggest sand dunes in the North American continent. We're talking about sand dunes that goes up hundreds of meters. And those sand dunes are there because why? Any guesses as to why the biggest sand dunes in North America are specifically down there? That's right, somebody's not brave. Oh, there we go. Karen's not brave enough back there. Yeah, this is the delta of the Colorado River. So think about that beautiful art over millennia of the Colorado River carving out one of our state's treasures, the Grand Canyon. Where did all of that carving go, all of the sand? It went all the way down to the bottom of the delta where the Colorado River embarks into the Sea of Cortez. And nowadays, we've really transformed that environment, right? We built the Hoover Dam, several dams for water collection. And so we're going to talk about how that's also impacted the flora, the fauna of the upper Gulf as well. And so that black landscape with that wonderful sand landscape is just incredible. And so also they identified the 10 enormous, deep, and almost perfectly circular craters, believed to have formed by a combination of eruptions and collapses that also contribute to the dramatic beauty of the site. So it's that exceptional combination of features which are of great scientific interest. So that's the reason why it's a UNESCO Biosphere Reserve. And if we look at this map here of Sonora, what's interesting that it shows here is that the rainfall here. You could see this basically channel right here is the mean annual rainfall. It's more rainy up here in the upper elevations of the Sierra Madres, and it's less rainy over here in the far west of the state of Sonora, where we find the UNESCO Biosphere Reserve. On average, less than 4 inches a year. And so that makes it some of the world's most harshest landscapes, but in essence, that has also helped protect it in its integrity over the years as well. And this map comes from what to me is really the Bible to understanding our neighbor, the state of Sonora. It's called Sonora, Its Geographical Personality by Robert West, who was a geographer from the University of Texas. And in there, his main thesis is that the state has two geographical personalities. The western half is considered New Sonora, and B, the eastern half, is considered Old Sonora. And the reason for that is because of population patterns of settlement, more or less. This area up here has more rainfall, more forage, more mountains where silver extraction took place. With the water and the silver extraction, that was the main area where the Spaniards came. It's also where the Native Americans had mainly their villages too, as well. There's some archaeologists that theorize that the indigenous that settled these river valleys here came from the Paquime culture after it collapsed, that they settled these river valleys. The reason why they believe that is because we live in an area called the Upper Pimeria, and there's also a Lower Pimeria. The Pimeria refers to the Pima people, the Atam people. So they were separated by this incoming Opata group here. That's why this is the old part of the state. You find all the missions, the military posts, the mines, the old indigenous villages, and the interesting features of the mountains, and the north, the four north and south running river valleys. Where in contrast, the western half is the flat coastal plain that leads up to the Sea of Cortez. There's you could see isolated mountain ranges, but it's mainly a flat plain with much less waterfall than the eastern part of the state here as well. They call this area Northern Sonora because within the state of Sonora, we're seeing a migration shift. Whereas back in the day, pre-1950s, most of the population lived in these areas, and they still did the traditional trades that they did, whether it was mining, ranching, farming. But what we're seeing since the 1950s is this migration to the western part of the state of Sonora. And what's driving this? Well, if you're a young high school kid and you're going to college, you're probably going to go to college in Hermosillo, Nogales, Ciudad Obregón, some of the big cities. And if you don't want to work in ranching and mining, pretty much the only two options up in this area, you stay. And that's why we're seeing these cities grow very, very large. Not just Hermosillo with 1 million people, but Nogales with 500,000 people. Think about that. Nogales, Arizona has 19,000 people. It's like a small neighborhood of the Mexican side. The Nogales, Arizona is dying economically today, whereas the Mexican side is roaring economically today. And that has to do with that population flux. You have a lot of young people coming to work in these towns as well. And historically, this area was kind of off limits for the Spanish because of an indigenous group known as the Seris. They call themselves the Comcac. Seri is a Yaqui word for people of the sand. So the Spaniards would usually ask their Indian allies, what do you call these people, the newcomers that they come across? And so that's why we have a lot of these different terminology for the different indigenous tribes, right? And so basically up in this area, you would still have Atam, but you'd have a different Atam. You'd have Hayached Atam, or sand people, the sand Atam as well, which are working on recognition to this day. And so in these maps, you can see that very distinction topographically between the eastern and the western half, and then ecologically with the different zones. Definitely in the heart of the Sonoran Desert is where Rocky Point and the Grand Desert of Altar and the Pinacate volcanic shield is. Whereas in eastern Sonora, you have thorn scrub, pine, you have the grasslands like we have up in this area as well. So much more diverse landscape in the eastern parts here. The sister park is definitely Organ Pipe National Monument. I wish that they were somehow connected and had a lot more concessions for the migrations of animals, because these two are very much related to each other. And so you can see most Americans, when they go out to Rocky Point, they take this highway through the Autumn Reservation. If they're coming from Tucson, if they're coming from Phoenix, they usually drop down this way through Ajo here, and then you actually travel through the Oregon Pipe National Monument. There's a very famous rare wetlands right here called Tubac. It was in the news recently, maybe, well, not recently now, it was in the last administration when they were building the wall. It's a rare wetland, the Tubac. It's right on the U.S.-Mexican border there, and it's kind of one of those important water sources for human migration and animal migration this way as well. But that's the water source they were pumping dry to mix the cement for the border wall. But it's also where you may have heard or you may have seen over here in the Heritage Garden, where National Park Service employees and University of Arizona representatives found the oldest rootstock of what's our white pomegranate, the original rootstock that would have been brought here by the Jesuit missionaries in the 1600s. I don't know if you've ever tasted it. If you've never tasted it, go up to a nursery in Tucson like Desert Survivors or Mission Garden, and you can buy your own 4th century adapted Kino heritage fruit tree. And Kino was in this area, and we're going to get to him in a little bit shortly here too. But you can also see here on this map, it shows a little bit more too of basically the dirt loops that you do when you enter the park. Right now, there's 2 entries now to the park. There's another entry over this way that has the main visitor center. But there's another entry right here, which is a biological ranger station here. And this is where you go up basically to what most people do is this loop right here. There's also an opportunity to go up to the mountains here, the Pinacate Range. And you definitely need a 4x4 to get any further field in that area. Here we can see a little bit more of the features as well. Here you can see the reserve headquarters. Here it's kind of at this turn in the freeway. If you've ever been on this road, there's a little bit of a community right here. And then here's the main visitor center down in the area of the dunes. This is the area of the craters, and this is the area of the dunes down in this area. And so this is an early 1800s lithograph of the San Papago, or the Hayachad Autumn. These were some of the people that were protesting when the Tubac was being pumped dry back in the last administration. They're looking for recognition currently federally as well. A lot of the tribal members live on both sides of the border. There's a pretty good representation in Ajo as well. And we have very much evidence of human habitation, human migration within the reserve as well. This is called Tinaja de los Papagos. Papago is kind of like the Seri word. It's what the Apaches called the Autumn. It means bean eater. Now we think that's a derogatory term. It wasn't derogatory. It simply basically told you their lifestyle, whereas the Apaches were hunter-gatherer raiders, whereas the Autumn were more sedentary farmers. And so that's why they were tepary bean eaters, if you will. But Tinaja literally translates to tanks. And these tanks, these places where you have rocks that are sources that hold water, they're priceless watering holes along different trails in this area. You know, the southern trail to get out to the California gold fields dip through this area. There was also the Camino del Diablo, which some of you may have read the book by Urrea, Luis Alberto Urrea. It was a trail that had been used since the colonial times. A lot of people don't realize that the first Anza expedition actually used the Devil's Highway to go out. The Apaches had stolen the horse herd here at Tubac, so they had to go get fresh horses down in Mexico, and so that's why they went south and then up through the Pinacate, through the Camino del Diablo to get to California as well. So between the indigenous habitation and also the Spanish colonial and Mexican era, as well. So we talked a little bit about the fauna with the borregos, the bighorn sheep, and the antelope. How about some of the fauna? Well, this one really takes the cake in my mind as far as interesting flora goes. This is known as sand food, and it's this fascinating tuber that grows in the sand dunes. It's a long, long tuber to get down to actually the soil. And believe it or not, the sand is a really great retainer of moisture. And so if that tuber can extend, who knows, maybe up to 10 meters, 5, 7 meters down into the soil, it can survive. And you could see it actually, it really doesn't, it's a parasitic, so it actually attaches its roots to other roots, like brittle bush, other small, low to the ground desert plants. And so it doesn't need any chlorophyll. You can't see any green there from photosynthesis, but it does have beautiful little purple flowers there. And so the Indians would basically roast the long sand food tuber in the coals, and it was a regular food source for them to have. There you have the Latin scientific name for it too, as well. And the reason why the human habitation has such a long legacy or pedigree here is basically because of the tradition of the salt pilgrimage, of the autumn. It was a tradition, part of their lifespan. When young men or women reached puberty, they would go out to the coast and collect the salt. And salt was a precious commodity, of course, for cooking, for everything, for human life. And here we also see some other cactus. Some of the cactus that you'll see there that you won't find north of the border. Well, the only one you'll find north of the border natively is the Oregon pipe, just in that southwest corner of the state. That's the only place it grows north. But you'll also find Sanita cactus, which is sometimes referred to as the grandfather, has the barba, I'm saying the Spanish word, the beard of that as well. And they both give delicious fruit. In fact, the Oregon pipe cactus fruit in Sonora, it's one of my favorite ice creams that they produce down there. And it's it's called nieve de pitaya. It's really a hyper-seasonal food because people love it so much, it's exhausted the supply. It's one of the few good things about going to Sonora in the middle of the summer when it's smoking hot, is having some of that antidote to the real heat is the nieve de pitaya. And of course you can see the petroglyphs too, which are you could find present throughout the reserve. So some of the first European explorers would have had to be connected with the Coronado expedition. And here, Denny Seymour a couple years ago gave a big talk about how here in our backyard we may have one of the oldest European settlements, which was a halfway fort of the Coronado expedition. But one of the main things people forget about the Coronado expedition is that there was a naval arm to the expedition. They realized with basically a walking town that they were going to need to resupply this army looking for the 7 cities of Cibola, right? And so Hernando de Alarcón, he was actually the cook of the viceroy in Mexico City. He was basically commissioned to be the naval arm, to be the resupply arm of the Coronado expedition. But you have to imagine, 1540, the cloud of geography. They didn't realize, they would be so far away from the Coronado expedition going into the heart of North America. And so that's why Melchor Diaz was sent out by Coronado to basically look for signs of the Hernando de Alarcón resupply ships. And when he was going actually out through the Pinacate, I guess a dog, one of the dogs that they were with, kind of upsetted him or was going after some of their sheep. And he had his lance and was trying to hurt the dog. And basically he ends up impaling himself on his own lance. Karma got him, and so he'd be buried out somewhere out there in that area. Hernando de Alarcón, it's actually one of the goods. Everybody likes to paint the conquistadors red, but if you actually look at Hernando de Alarcón and his relation, and he had very good relations with the Native Americans, and he ascended the Colorado River as far north as present-day Yuma. So that would very much make him the first European to also step on California soil from that eastern side of California as well. And then it wouldn't be for almost 200 years later when Kino makes his first inroads there. His first entrada into the Pinacates in 1698. We do have two diaries, his diary and his companion's diary, but it's a little bit more limited as knowledge. But why was he trying to go out that way? Do you guys have any idea why he would be going that far out to such a harsh area? No? Looking for souls? Oh yeah, constantly. The Jesuits were always looking for souls to bring into the Roman Catholic. Yeah, sure, they would have needed that as a necessary resource. But what he was really after was, being the Renaissance man that he was after a better understanding of the geography. And so if you look at the old maps, you got some of them here, behind us here, on the wall. If you look at the old maps from the 1500s, they show California as an island, and it wasn't until Kino actually came to the Pinacate, he ascended the Pinacate mountain, and he was able to see the curvature of the northern coast of the Gulf of California or the Sea of Cortez. He was the one that finally put to rest the myth that it was an island, but in fact, it was one of the longest peninsulas in the whole world. And so he did that from the crest of Pinacate Mountain. And the following expeditions, years later in 1701, 1706, he would bring back, royal observers and other Jesuit officials to prove to them that, in fact, this was the case, more or less. The next kind of Europeans to get in there would be a British Royal Navy. And thereafter, Mexico had just got its independence. Before independence, New Spain was off limits to foreigners. No foreigners could go. And so when Mexico got its independence, it opened up its country to free markets. And who were one of the first people to take up on that? Well, the enemies of Spain, the English, right? And so they were interested in pearl fisheries in the Gulf. And so Lieutenant William Hardy, he has a great, it's actually online on Google Books. You can read the whole diary. He actually is the one that gives the name Rocky Point. And so the original name wasn't Puerto Peñasco, it was actually Rocky Point because of this Royal Navy expedition into the Sea of Cortez. And it's Rocky Point because essentially the volcanic, that low flow volcanic flow of magma, it hits the water there. And you can imagine it causing the reaction, causing the Rocky Point that has created one of the best harbors in the northern Gulf of the Sea of Cortez. And so this is it. This is the mountaintop, the highest point in the reserve. You can see it's almost 4,000 feet in elevation. And the word Pinacate actually comes from the Nahuatl or the Aztec word for beetle. When the beetles are upset with you, they put up their rear end. It kind of looks like the tip of that mountain. And so that's where the name comes from for Pinacate, right? So that you can imagine Kino up there with his navigational instruments there in 1698, 1701, and 1706. And there he is. If we really want to think about who we have to thank for American cowboy culture, this is the guy. I mean, even before on his explorations, even before he founded missions, he dropped off cattle at the different indigenous villages so they could get their own herds going, basically. And this is a little wayside exhibit there in the park that talks about those heritage fruit trees that you guys have here at the Tubac Presidio as well. What's so amazing about this project that was started in the early 2000s by the National Park Service and the U of A is that they basically went on both sides of the border looking for the oldest rootstock they could find, old timers' backyards. And so now when you go and get it at the nursery, they've propagated now to where, the public can have these 4th century adapted desert fruit trees. The taste that you're tasting is the same exact taste they would have tasted in the 1600s because it's not propagated through seeds. It's genetic clones over time. And that to me is just marvelous. And so if you do make the decision to ascent up there, there is a little sign honoring Father Kino in the 1706 ascent, in which he did have the royal observers to make the claim, more or less. And so we've even had more recent explorers. We all heard about Apollo 13, but how about Apollo 14, guys? This was the first lunar expedition to bring the lunar rover. And so the Pinacate was essentially the closest to the lunarscape that they could find here, with that crunchy cinder ash that you walk on. And there's graffiti, there's etchy petroglyphs, if you will, of the astronauts in the park that you can find from their training that was there in the early 70s. And so, Shepard, Ingle, they're famous astronauts. And this is one of my favorite images of the reserve. Here you can see that stunning contrast. So not only do you have the volcanic shield, which you can see in the lowlands there, and the sand dunes, but you have these these beautiful granite massive ranges. And this is called the Sierra Blanca, right? The white or the light-colored mountains. That's just a gorgeous contrast. And so here you can see the actual map here. There's actually little interpretive signs here. You can see the different numbers. And so you follow this pathway. It's just about 25 kilometers that you can go. It's perfectly fine to bring a two-wheel drive vehicle. We've done it in a two-wheel drive vehicle. But it's all that cinder, that crunchy cinder that you basically go along the gravel there. And so you could see, depending on if you go this way, you see the biggest crater. I'm going to show you a slide of that, El Elegante. El Tecolote, I'll show you that. I call that the Botanical Preserve. It's a wonderful camping area too, so people do camp. And then that's Cerro Colorado, which was that first slide that I showed you there as well. And this is what the little biological station looks like when you go in. And this is the little pamphlet that they give you. It's about, I would give you, if you're going to go on your own, I would give yourself about 3 or 4 hours to do the loop and really to take in the scenery as well. It's about, I think it's about it's about 80 kilometers, so about 60 miles, more or less, to do the whole loop. And so there you could see what it's like. That's pretty much most of the route, the gravel there, the crunchy gravel. And here is that stunning satellite image from NASA that shows you not only the black flows, but also the red flows from the lava. And then here at the bottom, you could see the sea of sand dunes as well. And the map on the left shows you all the tinajas. So those are all of the places where there would be water holes from rock and catchments of water. So you find petroglyphs in all of those areas as well from the salt trail. And then this map here lists the 10 different Mar craters, the 10 different eruptions, the monumental craters. And this is the biggest one. It's called the Elegant one, which I think is a beautiful name. It's about a mile across and about, I think, 800 feet deep? Yeah, 820 feet deep. It's amazing walking up to it. The wind, you just catch the wind as you get up there. And it's surreal how large it is, to imagine what that explosion was like when that magma met that water and the steam that created. And so that's the other one, the Cerro de Colorado, from a distance. That's when you're approaching it, and that's from the southern end. So that's where the rim is the tallest there. And then this is near the camping site, which I like to call the Botanical Garden. And it's just, as you can kind of capture from the image, it's just a surreal landscape that green plants and black and red, and it's almost psychedelic. So now that we talked about Pinacate, let's talk about Puerto Peñasco, Rocky Point. And now you know that the English name was the original name. It really got off the ground in the 1920s. There was nothing there before. And the reason why it got off the ground was basically it was a seasonal camp for tatuaba fishermen. And tatuaba is a big fish that's in the Gulf. You may have heard it in the news because it's a really big source of black market Chinese medicine. They basically use the throat of the tatuaba for some Chinese medicine. And so now, you have overfishing of it, unfortunately. And some people really like to blame the fishermen that, because of the black market trade in the Tatuaba, they like to blame them for the plight of one of the most endangered animals on the planet, the vaquita porpoise. Have you guys heard about it's a small snub-nosed dolphin that is only found in the upper Gulf of the Sea of Cortez, more or less. They estimate, I think the last count was something like 17, 18 left in the world. And, you know, they do the government does these moratoriums on fishing. They actually pay the fishermen not to fish with the hope that the numbers would rise. But you don't really see any fluctuation in the number. And the reason why is because I think people are overlooking the fact that, you know, think about now almost a century of hydraulic engineering on the Colorado River, the Hoover Dam, all of the water that we're taking from that river, that sweet water, that fresh water, that's no longer the metric gallons, the millions of billions of metric gallons. That's not emptying out into the Sea of Cortez anymore. And for me and other scientists, they are thinking that that's in fact the real plight of the vaquita porpoise. That what used to be a zone of half and half fresh water and saline water is now a hypersaline environment, because the fresh water is no longer coming out into the delta because of California, our state, Utah, all of those states, more or less. And the other thing that breathed life into it, of course, was prohibition in the 1920s and 30s. You know, it's the same thing for all the border towns. When did Nogales, when did Tijuana, when did Juarez first start receiving American tourists? When did this phenomenon of American tourists start visiting the Mexican border towns? Well, it was because Americans, they wanted to engage in criminal activities. They wanted to have a glass of wine or beer, right? And so Mexicans have always stepped up to the plate for Americans' nefarious needs. To this day, right? You know, who has the biggest appetite for illicit drugs in the whole wide world? It's us, you know, and as much as we like to malign Mexico and, you know, try to find solutions that don't work for stopping the drug trade, you know, the narcos of today, they're no different than Al Capone of the 20s and 30s. No one's asking the question, the $1,000,000 question in my mind, is why do Americans have the biggest appetite for illicit drugs, right? And so this area too is being affected by that trade as well, as we've seen in the news, you know, as well. And so, yeah, the first thing that they built there was a casino, of course, right? You know, or you may have memories of going to Tijuana, you know, the Greyhound races, placing the bets on them there too at the Agua Caliente track. And so the next decade, 1930s, Lázaro Cárdenas, he's been very much likened to our FDR. They call him Tata Cárdenas, Grandpa Cárdenas in Mexico, with a lot of honor and reverence. He's the one that's really getting on the infrastructure projects. And so he's the one that built the first railroad link from the mainland of Mexico to Baja California. And so that also starts to bring people into the little sleepy fishing village, more or less. And then 1940s, you know, the shrimp fishing becomes really big. In fact, a lot of people don't know this, but the Mexicans had to chase out the Japanese shrimping fleet in the 40s during World War II. I mean, this is where Jacques Cousteau called the aquarium of the world. So home to some of the richest marine life you can find anywhere, right? And so that, to this day, if you go to the old harbor, you see all the fishing ships. And so you know it's still an important part of the local commercial economy. So in 41, it was a population of barely 200, you know, between fishing and working on the rails and also highways. Now it's 63,000 people. And they're having issues with water there in Rocky Point because of that. For me, there's really only one book that I've found that really I feel like does justice to this place, and it's produced. It was by the University of Arizona Press, and it was by Julian Hayden. And Julian Hayden was an amazing archaeologist. He was one of the first archaeologists to work extensively in the Pinacate region. And there's also beautiful photographs by Jack Dekina, and there's also essays by Charles Bowden. I don't know if you know him, but he was a famous journalist here in the Borderlands as well. His sister used to live here, Peg Bowden, here in Tubac as well. And if you want to learn more, I guess I'm sure a lot of you guys are fans of this program. It's on Amazon Prime too, so you can, after this talk, you can pull it up. Here's David Yetman and Alberto Burquez, who's a wonderful scientist that lives both in Tucson and Hermosillo. And they're in front of the beautiful desert lily, the ajo lily there, which actually has a bulb that, it concentrates all the energy to give off that beautiful flower in the springtime there as well. So I recommend checking that episode out as well. And I want to, of course, invite you. Now you've learned the theory, how about we go do the practice and go explore ourselves? And so October 1 through 4, we're going to go back to, we're calling it Volcanoes and Sea. And we have wonderful partners there. You may have heard of CEDO, the Ecological Center for Deserts and Oceans. It's a wonderful nonprofit there in Rocky Point. And so one day we go out to the estuary. There's a wonderful women's co-op. They grow oysters. They have seafood there. And we even go on kayaks in the tranquil estuary. And then the other day we go to the volcanoes too. As well. So I want you to invite you to come and join us on that trip and get your feet wet, literally too.